Cooperstown, New York, Monday, 12 June, 1939. The National Baseball Hall of Fame opens its doors to the public for the first time and enshrines its first 4 classes of inductees, since they'd been electing people since '36, but it took a few more years for the building to be finished, so the first induction weekend wasn't until '39. The Baseball Hall of Fame was the world's first edifice of its kind, a facility dedicated to commemorating people who have achieved feats of greatness or immortality in a particular field of human endeavor. And in the 7 or so decades since that very first induction weekend in Cooperstown, many more halls of fame have been built. Not just the ones for the major team sports that we all know about, but for all kinds of other things, too. In fact, the Wikipedia list article for Halls of Fame contains an astounding 349 entries. You may have been hitherto unaware, for example, that there's a Poker Hall of Fame, and a Curling Hall of Fame, and a Chess Hall of Fame. Even a Hall of Fame for golf caddies. Yes, you heard me right. There is actually a Hall of Fame for carrying someone else's golf clubs. There is also a Bowling Hall of Fame, and a Water Polo Hall of Fame, a Video Game Hall of Fame, a Bull Riding Hall of Fame, a Scuba Diving Hall of Fame, a Consumer Electronics Hall of Fame, an Agriculture Hall of Fame, and doesn't that one sound exciting? I can't tell you how many times my kids, back when they were little, used to come up to me and say, "Dad, can we please go to the Agriculture Hall of Fame? My favorite soybean grower is getting inducted this year." There's a Game Show Hall of Fame, a Model Car Hall of Fame, a Military Intelligence Hall of Fame, even an Insurance Hall of Fame, which sounds nearly as exciting as the Agriculture Hall of Fame. Now, I was very elated when my favorite claims adjuster finally got inducted, though I thought it was a damnable outrage that he had to wait until the 4th ballot. So, why am I bringing this up, you ask? Because I think it's high time we had a new Hall of Fame to add to that list. A fake crying Hall of Fame. And I've even prepared a list of nominees for the first class who knows, one day they might be viewed with the same degree of reverence as baseball's first Hall of Fame class of 1936. Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Walter Johnson, Christy Matthews, and Hannes Wagner. And with his performance in the George Stephanopoulos damage control interview that aired last night on ABC, I think Alec Baldwin established himself as a first ballot shoo-in, the immortal among immortals, the man who will be the Babe Ruth of his inaugural Hall of Fame class. Now, if you saw any of this performance that he put on, you may have found yourself asking the same question I did. How can a professional actor be so bad at pretending to cry? I thought it was pretty telling that he didn't try to summon the crocodile tears until right at the end of the interview, when he had spent the whole time up until that point acting just like the arrogant, entitled, borderline sociopathic, bitchy prima donna that we all sort of knew he was already. I don't know whose fault this was, but I know it wasn't mine. Declares the man who was holding the gun when a bullet exited the barrel and struck 2 of his co-workers. And if that wasn't classy enough, he took the additional step of actually blaming Helena Hutchins for her own death. She told me to aim the gun at her. What was I supposed to do? One could almost get the sense from this that they got to the end of this dramatic production, because it's really kind of a stretch to call it an interview, since the whole purpose of the exercise was for Stephanopoulos to sort of hold his hand and gently guide him through a series of sympathetic soliloquies that would hopefully rehabilitate his public image. But it was almost like you could see the light bulb go off in his head as he realized, whoopsie, I may have come off looking like a total asshole here, so I guess I'd better try to summon some fake tears right at the end just to be safe. And it wound up being a performance so unconvincing, so transparently fake as all hell, that it reminded me of another guy who is also on my Hall of Fame nominee list tonight, that being former Heisman Trophy winner, NFL All-Pro, and noted double knife murderer Orenthal James Simpson, who, immediately following his acquittal in January of 1996, sat down for an interview with BET, in which he, too, got right to the end of the thing, realized it probably hadn't gone all that well, and went to the "maybe I should pretend to cry" card. So he pretends to get choked up while blubbering about how much he loved Nicole. And if Norm Macdonald was here right now, instead of in the great comedy club in the sky, he might say, Yeah, he loved her so much he decided to only stab her 17 times instead of 18. Why don't we dispense with the intro and then I'll break down the rest of the list of nominees. So, Jim Eagle, hit that music like the fist of an angry god, if you would, please. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where fake crying is almost as popular as woke diversity training, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. The next nominee on the list is someone whom you probably already guessed was going to be on it. Mr. Jussie Smollett, the one and only, the noted D-list television actor and unfortunate hate crime victim, who you may remember was innocently walking across town to get a Subway sandwich back in early 2019 in Chicago in January during a polar vortex, when he was recognized from across the street by two crazed white supremacist MAGA hat-wearing Trump supporters, who just happened to be avid viewers of the low-rated Fox TV show on which he was a supporting player. And that might be my favorite thing about self-important minor celebrities, how they seem to operate in the belief that they are far more famous and recognizable than they actually are. The assailants then proceeded to pummel Mr. Smollet about the head and upper torso while shouting racist, homophobic abuse in addition to political invective like, "This is Trump country," because, as we know all too well, if there's any place in this country where an innocent gay black man is likely to be assaulted by racist redneck Trump supporters, it's downtown Chicago, where support for Trump runs at such a fever pitch that he got 17% of the vote in the last election. But the harrowing assault did not end there, for these two crimson-hatted Klansmen proceeded to pour bleach over Mr. Smollett's head and wrap a pretend noose around his neck, which the fake news totally was not any sort of a giveaway that this event was not a legitimate assault, because if there's anything we've learned in the last 4 or 5 years, when a person claims to have found a fake noose, or to have been personally festooned with one in this case, and they purport to be the victim of a hate crime, it never, ever winds up being a hoax. Well, except for the 100% of the time when it does, but never mind that. That's not important now. And you also shouldn't ask why a couple of racist thugs would be roaming around downtown Chicago at 2 a.m. when it's 5 goddamn degrees outside, carrying a jug of Clorox and a fake noose just on the off chance that they might encounter a gay black celebrity from a TV show that they watch religiously every week. Because if there's anything we know about violent race, white, homophobe, vigilante types, it's that they totally love shows with all black casts, and the more gay characters, the better. The current president of the United States and the current vice president of the United States, neither of them saw anything implausible about Mr. Smollett's version of events. For within less than 12 hours, they had each tweeted out their unconditional support for poor Jussie, the innocent, blameless hate crime victim who just wanted to go get himself a sandwich. And just like every other practically owner of a Twitter blue checkmark did, for there ensued a days-long orgy of online pearl clutching and hate tweeting in which basically everybody in Hollywood and everybody in Washington and elsewhere fell all over one another, praising Mr. Smollett for his courage and his bravery and his moral fortitude, and condemning Donald Trump in the strongest possible terms for creating such a toxic political environment wherein vicious criminals are emboldened to commit such heinous acts of depravity. For his part, Mr. Smollet sat down a few days later for a highly publicized interview with Robin Roberts of ABC. It's always ABC, isn't it? In which the soft-ballishness of the questions made George Stephanopoulos look like freaking Edward R. Murrow by comparison. And again, just like with his fellow nominees, Mr. Baldwin and Mr. Simpson, Mr. Smollett saved the fake waterworks for right at the very end, as he moaned about how terribly difficult it is having people question his status as an innocent hate crime victim, while Ms. Roberts gazed at him with a look that seemed to say, "Boy, if you weren't gay, I would be so all over your jock right now," before signing off the interview with the words, "So brave, Jussie. Thank you." Fast forward to today, around 2.5 years later, and Jussie Smollett is on trial, charged with an assortment of 6 different felonies, facing several years in state prison. because he paid $3,500 to a couple of Nigerian weightlifters to beat him up and make it look like a racist hate crime. Allegedly. Oh, and the bleach and the twine that they fashioned the fake noose out of were both bought with his credit card, because this dude is clearly a galaxy brain criminal mastermind who is really good at covering his tracks. Oh, and they did a dress rehearsal too. And how do we know that? Because there's all manner of security footage that shows the three of them selecting the exact spot where the assault should take place, ultimately settling on a location where there were multiple cameras that would capture the dastardly crime at just the right angles. And since this guy is such a galaxy brain criminal mastermind, it evidently never occurred to him, it never even crossed his mind, that if these cameras were going to capture the actual incident, then it probably stands to reason that they also caught your stupid dress rehearsal. So really, Mr. Smollet should be considered for induction into the Human Intellect Hall of Fame, as well as the Fake Crying Hall of Fame. Our next nominee is a no-brainer, really, as Chuck Schumer is such an accomplished practitioner of fake crying that President Donald Trump himself was impelled to christen the senior senator from New York with the loving honorific sobriquet of Cryin' Chuck. And if Donald Trump thinks you're a Hall of Famer, that's good enough for me. But you know what? I think it's time for some female representation on this list of nominees, and we would be remiss in not including a woman of color. So Rachel Dolezal, come on down! Ms. Dolezal, as you may recall, is the milky white Caucasian lady who made such an art form out of pretending to be black that she actually worked her way up to being, what was it? She was a director or an assistant director of a state chapter of the NAACP. I will say this much for her, though. Her fake black accent is much more convincing than the one that Kamala Harris does on the occasions when she is shamelessly pandering to a mostly black audience. And you have to be really adept with hair color and a home perm kit in order to make your frustratingly Nordic blonde hair convincingly resemble an afro. So she gets busted for being white. Scandal of scandals, right? And instead of doing the smart thing and just dropping off the face of the earth, she thought she could make the thing go away by doing an interview that was replete with fake crying. But unlike our previous nominees, she displayed considerably more versatility in her fake emoting repertoire. She alternated between the lip-biting choke-up and the all-out slobbery blubberfest, and the more understated technique in between where one alters the timbre of one's voice as if they're about to explode in a cascade of tears and they're just barely holding it together. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I was really black, but I was born in the wrong body. None of this had the desired effect, of course, but nonetheless, it was a performance for the ages. More than enough, in my judgment, to earn Ms. Dolezal her rightful inclusion on this list. But if you thought she was the only woman of color among these nominees, you have got another thing coming, my friend. For we would be derelict in our duties if we did not recognize the fake crying exploits of Her Royal Highness Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, who, uniquely among the entrants on this list, is actually a far better actress when she's playing a fake version of herself than she is when she's playing a fictional character on a show that 18 people have ever heard of. She also tends to be a bit more judicious and restrained in her exercise of the crocodilian arts than are some of our other nominees. She picks her spots very carefully. If she's doing an hour-long Oprah interview, she usually only fake cries once or twice while delivering the lines that she intends to have the maximum emotional impact, like when she was making the allegation that some unnamed senior member of the royal family had expressed trepidation about what color her son's skin was going to be. No actual tears, just a little hitch in the voice, and a little hand brought up to the mouth, and the feigned hesitation because this is so difficult to talk about, even though I'm making it all up. And it helps a lot when you have a willing tag team partner who wants to go to the mat for you to sell the illusion. So right on cue, Oprah jumps in with the incredulous gasp and the, you can't be serious. Just the way they rehearsed it. So my compliments to the chef. Mwah, that's great stuff. That is a master at work. The Fake Crying Hall of Fame is almost too small and insignificant an edifice to contain the talents of Her Royal Highness. So moving from one extreme to the other, our next and penultimate nominee is someone whom I could never in good conscience exclude from a list like this one, and that is Representative Adam Kinzinger, Republican of Illinois, who does so much fake crying, it's difficult to see how he has time for anything else. This guy does more fake crying before he gets out of bed in the morning than most people do in the average year. I watch more congressional hearings than most people, more than could ever be considered healthy. And I don't know that I've ever heard Mr. Kinzinger speak continuously for more than 90 seconds without breaking down in a total bitch fit of performative blubbering. This guy cries with the same frequency that normal people breathe. This guy cries at least 4 times in the course of taking a shower. This guy cries in the middle of ordering breakfast at the drive-thru. This guy cries when saying hello to his staffers in the morning, then he goes into his office, closes the door, and cries again. This guy cries so much he sometimes gets dehydrated and has to go to the emergency room for an IV. If crying was an Olympic event, this guy would be the 3-way bastard gay love child of Jesse Owens, Michael Phelps, and Usain Bolt. So if you're a Hall of Fame voter who values quantity over quality, then I think Kinzinger is an easy choice for the number 1 slot on your ballot. And last but not least, Randy Moss, who's only had one noteworthy instance of public fake crying, and it happened just a few weeks ago. But it was such an auspicious debut and such a prodigious performance that, in the judgment of this observer, it should rightly earn him Hall of Fame consideration. Now, the occasion, you may remember, was the firing of Oakland Raiders coach John Gruden, and yes, I still refuse to call them the Las Vegas Raiders, who was dismissed for the unconscionable crime of saying a black guy has big lips in a private email 10 years ago, which so deeply upset Mr. Moss that he spent a solid 5 minutes crying like a little bitch with a skinned knee because it's so terribly difficult being a black man in America. Especially a black man who was a multimillionaire before age 20, who at age 25 signed the biggest contract in the history of NFL wide receivers, who, for the bulk of his career, made more money each week than the average American does each year, who currently pulls down a comfy 7-figure salary for spending 6 months a year talking about other people playing football. People like you and me cannot possibly comprehend, much less appreciate, the struggles that this man has to go through on a daily basis, driving his Bentley home to his palatial seaside mansion, plagued with the knowledge that John Gruden, a coach he never played for, made fun of some dude's lips in a 2011 email. And there, but for the grace of God, go we all. And those are all the nominees I have, but hopefully I've given the voters something to think about. And I look forward to a spirited debate among the expert analysts in the field of fake crying. And before I send you off to go enjoy your weekend, did you hear that story that President Corpsey Cadaverton told yesterday, the one about Israel? Now, normally when Joe Biden tells an obviously made-up story, there at least is some sort of tiny thread that tangentially connects it to some sort of reality, like the story about how he and his dad were driving down the street in Wilmington, Delaware in 1956 and saw a couple guys kissing on the sidewalk. Well, Joey, that just means they love each other. It's obviously a made-up story, but at least he did actually live in Wilmington, Delaware at the time. Or the story about how he got arrested trying to bust Nelson Mandela out of prison on a visit to South Africa in 1989. Again, the details may be fabricated out of whole cloth, but at least he did actually go to South Africa in 1989. But this latest story? I went to Israel during the 6-Day War to see Golda Meir because she wanted me to be the congressional liaison for... I forget what he said after that. Except Golda Meir wasn't the Prime Minister of Israel during the 6-Day War. And Joe Biden wasn't a senator during the 6-Day War. Joe Biden was in law school during the 6-Day War, and there's no record of him ever having traveled to Israel during the premiership of Golda Meir. So I can't help wondering, when he tells these stories, does he know they're made up? Or does he think he's talking about things that really happened? Because he wouldn't be the first senile old man to lose his grasp on the difference between fantasy and reality. But he would be the first one to have that experience while in possession of the nuclear codes. So on that terrifying note, we will close things out for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Here is wishing everyone a pleasant edifying weekend. I will see you Monday. Let me know in the comments if there are any deserving nominees that I neglected to put on the list. And until next time, do not comply. Get off my lawn.